Well, welcome back. Hasn't this time gone fast? I mean, we should be we need to spend hours together, but unfortunately, we don't have that long. But right now, we are going to talk about food and bourbon and why bourbon pairs so well with food. And this is where we go back to our cheat sheet, the tasting mat that you have. When you look on the right side, that is a bourbon tasting wheel, and it talks about all the various flavors that come out of the bourbon barrel when it blends with the whiskey. So what we're going to taste today are some foods that will really kind of give you a better idea on, oh, that's a taste that's in the bourbon, and maybe I didn't pick up on that. You know, we talked earlier about the grains and what is sweet, and then we bring some oat notes, and then what is nutty. So I put together a few little things that I think match really well with bourbon, no matter if it's high proof or low proof. It is a good staple tasting. So you can see right here, I'm going to start with an almond. And almonds are great with bourbon for several reasons. Number one is the nuttiness. Number two is if you really are having a bourbon tasting and at home, and let's say you have 3 or 4 different bourbons that people are going to be tasting, almonds can help cleanse your palate. So they're very good to taste in between when you're not eating something else. But what you get is the nuttiness. So what I want you to do is take a taste of your bourbon, just a little bit, swallow it down, and then pick up an almond, or if you have a pecan or a walnut, anything nutty, and then take another little taste. And what the food does, it interacts, it really gives you, it heightens the flavors in the bourbon. So when I have the almond and then I taste this, I get a lot more of the peppery notes. And I also get some, well, these happen to be salted almonds, but that's great because it goes wonderfully with this bourbon because of the rye and the spiciness. Okay? So another perfect food that matches with bourbon, and that is cheese. And we happen to have Parmesan cheese here. Pretty much any cheese because it is so savory, but Parmesan is perfect. And I don't know how many of you have ever noticed this in Parmesan before, but when you get a wedge, not what comes out of the green can, but a wedge of Parmesan, it has a lot of salt. And if you've ever seen Parmesan made, it goes into salt baths, and it is just coated in salt. So when you taste a piece of salty cheese that has this savoriness, and again, I'm drinking the Bullet, and it has a lot of rye, it makes a perfect combination. So I'm going to try my piece of cheese. And some bourbon. It's an explosion. My mouth right now is so peppery, and it's not a bad peppery. It's just like these little pepper explosions going on because of all the wonderful salt that is in that cheese and the bourbon. Another perfect mix with bourbon is chocolate. And we happen to have here, these are dark chocolate pieces. I like dark chocolate because I think with the bourbon, with the barrel being toasted, you get a lot of those cocoa notes, and starts getting really deep, almost into coffee. Now, some bourbons, like a Maker's Mark or an Old Forester, and they're 86 proof, they have less extreme taste to them. They have taste, but they're not as strong. So with those, milk chocolate might go better, but I think dark chocolate goes with everything. So I'm going to have a taste of the dark chocolate and my bourbon. Again, it really just, they pair so well. And it's interesting when you pair food with bourbon, because you can look at it saying, I want something that goes beautifully. The cheese and the bourbon pair perfectly. Chocolate and the bourbon pair perfectly. Sometimes, and that's the balance, but sometimes you want to look at a counterbalance, and you may say, okay, I want to have something that maybe doesn't go with that, but this is very peppery, and maybe I want something to bring it down. a notch. So I may want to have something sweeter. The dark chocolate tends to be sweeter and helps balance it. Another thing is fruit. Now, if you taste a bourbon, Old Forester comes to mind because Old Forester has so many wonderful fruit notes, a lot of banana, a lot of stone fruit, that when you'd have this apple with an Old Forester, it's just going to, everything's going to like, the angels will start singing and going, this is the perfect combination. I have a peppery bourbon here, and I'm going to have a piece of apple that tends to be a little bit more, not bitter, but it's a granny. It's a Granny Smith. I almost said old granny. It's a Granny Smith. So it just tends to be a little bit more pungent. So they're going to kind of hopefully balance each other out. We're going to see. It's really nice. The apple actually becomes a little less tart with the bourbon because there is some sweet in there. Now here's another tip. One of my favorite appetizers, and I could go on about food and bourbon for a long time. You've probably seen the book back here. Shameless plug. Right here, this book is available on Amazon. I happen to work for the woman who wrote it, but it is an amazing guide to entertaining with bourbon. That being said, she turned me on to green apple. You put a little bit of blue cheese on it and wrap it in prosciutto. So you've got that peppery wonderfulness of the prosciutto. You've got the very earthy. Blue cheese is really earthy and kind of gets down into that almost grainy. And this apple, and I'm telling you, your life will never be the same. Even if you don't drink bourbon, have that as an appetizer. But if you can, mix it with the bourbon. So, and then crackers, you know, there's lots of different foods that go well. What I encourage you to do is keep your bourbon exploration going. You can go online. There are so many bourbon clubs that are around. If you just did a Google search for tasting bourbon, you will come up with more blogs and groups that are really helping to educate people and keep spreading the good word from Kentucky. I did forget to tell you something very, very important in our second session, and that was about water. And I think I mentioned that the water here, because of being limestone, and that it has calcium. So, and I'm not a doctor, but I do play one on video. The next time your doctor tells you that your bones, you know, that you may need to be on calcium because they're starting to get frail, you just have a good old bourbon and tell them Margot sent you. So until next time, we hope you're here in 2 years, and cheers. Thank you for having me with you. Have a good time.